Okay, thank you. Thank you, Saxon. Well, thanks for having me at this forum today. I really enjoyed the Gojek talk just now because my brother lives in Jakarta and I used to visit him for the past 10 years, and I remember him having to do the haggling of the prices. So it has really come a long way, and thanks again, Gojek, for making my trip to Jakarta a lot easier. So, as Saxo have said, I'm a senior lecturer with the School of Business at the Singapore University of Social Sciences. And today, what I want to do is to share a little bit with you my experience with a special group of students. So in 2020, our university partnered with the Singapore Prison Service to allow selected inmates to take up a Bachelor of Science in Business. And so for the inaugural intake, we had a selected class of 8 male inmates. They obtained financial assistance from the Yellow Ribbon Singapore, which is a statutory board under the Ministry of Home Affairs. And Yellow Ribbon provides financial aid to inmates in order to help them acquire skills and hopefully acquire enough job requirements for them to reintegrate into society. So for this project with my university, faculty members from our university volunteer our time and teach the modules for this project on a pro bono basis. I volunteered and was very privileged to be the first instructor for this unique group of students. But ironically for them, these students who have broken the law, the first module that they have to take was a law module because I teach contract law at the School of Business in SUSS. So the theme So the theme at this year's Economic Policy Forum is to talk about furthering social good as we move forward as a nation. So I hope to contribute to this discourse by sharing my teaching experience with the Prison School project. Advancing social good is, of course, a very complex goal. And for my talk today, I just want to look at these 3 big questions of why, how, and for whom. So for each question, I would like to introduce a personality whose idea and outlook I feel provides a good response to the question posed. So I would like to start first with the questions of why and how. Why think about doing social good and how to go about it? Now for the prison school students, I conducted the contract law module online because this was January 2020, when we were in the thick of the pandemic. And online teaching was the default. So I had to teach online using the MS Team platform provided and set up by the prison school. For security reasons, prison school disabled the camera both ways. This means that I could not see my students and they couldn't see me. They could only hear my voice, and I will hear them only if they speak into the microphone that is provided. So essentially, we were talking to each other without having to see each other, and all they could see were the PowerPoint slide. This is the first time I teach online without my students seeing my face. So it felt as if the entire time I was standing behind a screen or a veil. And with this reference of the veil, I would like to introduce my first personality and his ideas. Teaching without the camera on reminded me of a very famous thought experiment known as the veil of ignorance from political philosopher and Harvard professor John Rawls. His idea was discussed in his 1971 book known as The Theory of Justice. To Rawls, justice is the first virtue of any social institution, just as truth is for any kind of system of thought. A theory, no matter how elegant or economic, must be rejected if it is untrue. So the same, laws and institutions, no matter how efficient, no matter how well arranged, must be abolished and reformed if they are unjust. Therefore, society must strive for justice. Rawls explained that members within a society will not engage in social cooperation unless they see that there is fairness in the way society operates. It's just as you will not donate to a charity which you know doesn't have good governance because you know the money would not be spent wisely. So why think about justice and why think about advancing social good? Wouldn't it happen eventually? Now, in his work, Rawls explained that, in fact, society is inherently unjust. It is unjust because the rules of society disproportionately reward people and penalize others for characteristics that are beyond their control. People can be and are often rewarded even if it had nothing to do with the effort that they put in. For example, children do nothing to deserve being born rich or poor, able-bodied or physically challenged. And yet these chances will disproportionately affect their lives. And to make things harder, many of us who are seen as successful or are near the top of society quite frequently contribute to and maintain these rules of injustice. So how can we strive for a just society? And to do this, Rawls came up with his very famous philosophical exercise known as the veil of ignorance. Rawls suggests that we should imagine that we sit behind a veil of ignorance that keeps us from knowing who we are in the society. This prevents us from identifying with our personal circumstances. So we do not know our race, our gender, or our attributes. We do not know whether we'll be the giver or the receiver. This ignorance will generate doubt in our minds, and as a result, we will always err on the side of caution, and we will make decisions or take actions that are more just. So just a simple illustration of this mindset is if I were tasked to cut a cake to share with my fellow speakers today, as a rational person, I would want the largest piece for myself. But because I might end up with the last slice of cake, so when I cut the cake, to achieve justice, I will cut them in even sizes so that my chances and everybody else's chances of getting a cake will be the same. Therefore, Rawls' veil of ignorance is to make us engender a mindset to contribute to justice, or at any rate, not undermine it. So practically, we can, for example, deny decision makers access to potentially biasing information of who will benefit the most or least from available options. For example, some years back, there were a discussion that the law school, when we take in students, we were somewhat influenced by the schools that they came from and whether they were from a particular neighborhood. And so there was some discussion that when we look at application of students for law school, certain information should be taken out. So this is what we can practically do. At times, it is to abandon some of our assumptions. So I would like to relate now to one of my teaching experience with this special group of students. Teaching law to students who are serving their prison term is a first time for me. So when I was preparing for the course, I looked through my teaching materials and I wanted to take out inappropriate slides because I didn't want to make them feel ill at ease. And I had this one particular slide which I use every semester to teach the effect of exemption clauses. Essentially, exemption clauses exclude the liability of a party who has breached a contract. And I had this slide where I used the analogy that exemption clauses were like a get out of jail card. So for the prison students, I took this slide out because I thought it wasn't appropriate. But then I couldn't find a more appropriate way to explain this concept. In the end, when one of the students braved the silence and he went to the microphone to ask me to explain the concept of an exemption clause, I decided, okay, I'm just going to go with it. And I explained to him, it is just like a get out of jail card. And guess what? He understood it immediately. So because of my own bias towards my prison student, I had in fact almost deprived them of an otherwise more effective way of understanding a concept. So the point is that we often operate under a lot of biases and conditioning which even we are not aware of. So let me go back again to the question of how. How can we strive for social good? And here's where I would like to introduce the second person in my talk and her ideas. Esther Duflo, as most of you would know, was the Nobel laureate for economics in 2019. She won the award with two others, but for today, my talk, I would just like to keep the spotlight on Ms. Duflo because she is the youngest winner ever and only the second female winner in this field. But also, in her interview last month with Channel News Asia, Duflo said this. She said, we should, as a human species, always be concerned about whoever is the poorest member in society. So I think John Rawls would definitely approve of such a mindset, and to have them in the same talk, I think it's appropriate. Together with her husband, who was also a fellow winner, Duflo researched extensively on what policy interventions would work to reduce poverty in developing countries. They used randomized experiments to document the effects of seemingly small policy measures. Now, this pioneered ways to fight global poverty by focusing on smaller, more manageable issues, showing us that we can think about advancing good, social good by taking small steps. So this was a TED Talk that she gave in 2010, where she mentioned some of their field experiment. Poverty, as we know, is a very huge problem, and the causes and possible solutions are really multifaceted and very complex. Million, billion, and trillions of dollars are put into policies to drive social good. But the results are hard to track, and often policymakers don't know if monies are properly spent. So to take the guesswork out of policymaking was what motivated the three of them. So with these three simple field experiments on a very small scale, Duflo and her team found evidence to support what policies work for the community. In one experiment, they gave 1 kilogram of free lentils to incentivize people in the villages in Rajasthan, India. This increased the rate of immunization from 6% to 38%. And in another field experiment conducted in Kenya, where malaria is one of the leading causes for mortality under 5 years old, their experiment showed that giving free bed nets to people brought the malaria cases down. And also, just deworming students kept them in school for more years. Modest gains, all of these, but all steps in the right direction. So to go back to my classroom, law is actually a very qualitative subject and is very challenging for students who are weak in English. Now, our inmates students had to take the same assessment and pass the same exam as all the other students who are taking the course. So this is a pretty typical slide in a law course, and in this slide, there is a legal principle that requires the students to locate and understand the application of 3 important questions. Now, even for most of us, just to locate this 3 questions, it's itself very tricky. So for the inmate students, what I did was to break down the question in 3 simpler questions and just tell them to think about answering yes or no. Now, this is a very small way of applying the concept, but as long as the students could understand, they will be able to get the right answer. It may not be a very eloquent answer, but it is definitely an answer in the right direction. And I'm happy to say that all of our prison students not only passed the law module, they passed it with pretty strong grades. And now for the last question of my talk, which is for whom? For whom should we advance social good? And now I would like to introduce the third person of my talk today. And this is one of our students in the prison project. His name is Wayne in the slide. It's not his real name, but it was a name used in a Channel News Asia interview about this project at our university. Wayne is 49 years old this year. He is the oldest student in class. He is serving an 11.5-year sentence for drug offenses, and he's 5 years into his sentence. This is his 6th time in prison. Well, he grew up poor and had only worked in very low-skilled jobs. With his prison record, it is quite impossible for him to reintegrate back into society. But despite all of this, to give himself a better life, he knew that education, and in fact a business degree, might just be the game changer for him. So when he was in prison, he took up the opportunity given by the prison school, took and completed his diploma with Ngee Ann Poly, and joined our program in 2020. So this is a Channel News Asia article which interviewed Wayne and also gives a good insight into our degree program. And that's my colleague, Dr. Zhou Zihan. By the time she taught the student, the prison had allowed her to teach them in person. And the point I wanted to make in this slide is that for the prison students, in fact, studying whilst in prison is a very challenging task, more than we can all ever imagine. As the vice principal of prison schools shared with me, many of the inmates find it almost a torture to be studying. They'd rather be working hard in the kitchen or washing the cells. But for Wayne, to have that desire and to keep that desire is truly extraordinary. In fact, he doesn't even dare to think about the end point. He's just going to give himself 8 years to try and finish the program, at which time he will be 57 years old. So on our part at the university, we try to complement whatever effort the inmates and the prison school are putting in. For many of them, academic writing is really the huge challenge. So we do supply additional resources to help them. So these are the 3 questions that I started with my talk. And to think about social good, it's true, we should keep fairness in our heart. We should think about making small steps, celebrate small success, and not to have too much of our own biases, and learn as much as we can about the fellow members of the societies, the ones that we're trying to reach out to. But ultimately, I believe that the one simple answer to all these questions is that every one of us want to belong to a just society, and I think this alone should motivate all of us. Thank you very much.